The Galactic Federation had watched the stars for 11,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed species discover fire, then fusion, then faster-than-light travel. They had cataloged every form of intelligent life across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. And in all that time, they had never encountered anything quite like humanity. It started with a probe, a small golden thing tumbling through the void between stars. The Silicate Collective found it first, drifting near one of their mining outposts in a system humans called Alpha. The probe was primitive by galactic standards. Its technology was centuries behind even the youngest Federation species. But what caught their attention was not the machine itself. It was what the machine carried. Music, mathematics, greetings in dozens of languages, pictures of families, of cities, of oceans and mountains, and most strangely of all, a map. A detailed diagram showing exactly where this species lived, which star they orbited, how to find their small blue world. The Silicate analysts studied the probe for 3 standard cycles. They ran every test their protocols demanded. They searched for hidden weapons, for surveillance systems, for any sign of the trap this obviously was. They found nothing. The probe was exactly what it appeared to be, a message in a bottle, thrown into an infinite ocean by creatures who hoped someone might find it. Ambassador Aura of the Silicate Collective was assigned to lead the first contact mission. She was old by her people's standards, her crystalline form bearing the marks of 2 centuries of diplomatic service. She had negotiated with the warlike and the enigmatic. She had brokered treaties that prevented wars and ended famines. She thought she understood how species behaved. The humans confused her from the first moment. When the Federation ship entered their solar system, the humans did not scramble their defenses. They did not demand identification or threaten retaliation. Instead, they broadcast a message on every frequency they possessed. It was a simple message, translated clumsily into mathematical symbols. Welcome. We have been waiting for you. Ara's tactical officer found this deeply suspicious. Surely it was a ruse, a ploy to lower their guard before an attack. But no attack came. The humans simply waited, their primitive ships forming an honor guard that escorted the Federation vessel toward their planet. The meeting took place in a city called Geneva, in a building the humans used for their own attempts at global cooperation. Ara noted that these attempts had been only partially successful. The humans still divided themselves into nations, still argued over resources, still waged occasional wars among themselves. By Federation standards, they were barely civilized, and yet they had sent a probe into the void carrying messages of peace and hope. The human delegation was led by a woman named Sarah. She was small by her species standards, her dark hair streaked with gray, her face lined with age. When she saw Ara for the first time, something happened that the ambassador had never witnessed in 200 years of first contacts. Sarah began to cry. Not from fear, not from sorrow. The tears streamed down her face as she smiled, as she reached out with trembling hands toward this alien being from the stars. Her voice shook as she spoke. "We always hoped," she said. "All our lives we looked up at the night sky and wondered if we were alone. And now you're here, you're really here." Ara did not know how to respond. In her experience, species meeting for the first time engaged in careful posturing. They established dominance hierarchies, negotiated from positions of strength, concealed weakness at all costs. They did not weep openly in front of strangers. They did not expose their vulnerabilities so freely. The humans did not seem to understand this. They brought gifts, works of art, samples of their music, seeds from their most beautiful plants. They asked for nothing in return. When Ara explained, as gently as she could, that the Federation operated on principles of fair exchange, the humans looked puzzled. "But these are gifts," Sarah said. "You don't give a gift expecting something back. You give it because you want the other person to have something good." The Federation analysts observing the meeting noted this exchange with concern. Either the humans were engaged in an elaborate deception of unknown purpose, or they operated on principles so foreign to galactic norms that they might as well be speaking a different language. Neither possibility was comforting. The second day brought the incident that would later be cited in thousands of academic papers across hundreds of worlds. A young observer named or was part of the Federation delegation. They were in species, their exoskeletons fragile compared to most galactic races, during a tour of the human facility or slipped on a wet floor. The fall shattered 3 of his limbs and cracked his thoracic plate. By standards, such injuries were serious but not life-threatening. Standard protocol called for evacuation to a Federation medical ship, where he would receive species-appropriate care. The humans did not wait for protocol. 3 human doctors were at or side within minutes. They had never seen a before that day. They had no training in alien physiology, no knowledge of his species' biology, no logical reason to involve themselves in what was clearly a Federation matter. But they knelt beside him on the floor, speaking in soft voices, asking questions about his anatomy and his pain levels. They worked through the night. Using translation software and desperate improvisation, they stabilized his injuries. They synthesized compounds to ease his pain after learning that standard human painkillers were toxic to his species. One doctor, an elderly man named James, stayed at or side for 14 hours straight, holding one of his uninjured limbs and talking to him in a gentle voice. Or asked why the doctor was doing this. They had only met hours ago. They were different species from different stars. What could he possibly gain from such effort? James looked at him with those strange human eyes, wet with an emotion or could not name. "You were hurt," the doctor said. "You were scared and alone and in pain. How could I walk away from that?" When Ara submitted her report to the Federation Council, she included the standard metrics: economic potential, moderate; military threat, minimal; technological level, primitive but advancing; cooperative index, high. But at the end of her report, she added a note that had never appeared in any first contact assessment in 11,000 years. "The empathy metrics have failed," she wrote. "Our systems cannot quantify what I observed. These beings do not calculate the value of compassion. They do not weigh the costs of kindness. They simply feel for others and then they act on that feeling, regardless of logic or self-interest. I do not know what this means. I do not know how to classify it. I know only that in 2 centuries of diplomatic service, I have never encountered anything like it." The Federation Council debated for 3 standard cycles. Some argued that humanity was too dangerous to admit, that their irrational behavior would destabilize carefully maintained galactic systems. Others believed they were simply primitive, that exposure to Federation culture would teach them to behave more reasonably. In the end, they granted humanity provisional membership, largely so they could study these strange creatures more closely. It was a decision that would change everything. The humans arrived at Federation headquarters with their characteristic lack of ceremony. They did not demand prestigious quarters or special recognition. They did not jockey for position on important committees. They simply settled into their assigned spaces and began doing what humans apparently did everywhere: connecting with people. Within months, human diplomats were having meals with representatives from dozens of species. They learned names, asked about families, remembered birthdays. They brought small gifts for no reason at all. They listened when others spoke, with an attention that seemed almost uncomfortable in its intensity. But what disturbed the Federation most was what happened in the shadows. Humans who encountered other beings in distress did not file reports or follow protocols. They stopped. They helped. They gave their time and their energy, and sometimes their resources to complete strangers, without any expectation of return. The Federation had spent 11,000 years building a civilization based on rational exchange, on careful calculation, on the mathematics of mutual benefit. And now these strange creatures from a small blue world were walking through their carefully ordered halls, spreading something that could not be calculated at all. The change started so slowly that no one noticed at first. A silicate merchant forgave a debt during an economic downturn. An engineer stayed late to help a struggling colleague from another species. A soldier hesitated before following orders that would cause unnecessary suffering. These were small things, isolated incidents that could be explained away as statistical anomalies. But the anomalies kept multiplying. 50 years after humanity joined the Federation, the galaxy looked different in ways that were difficult to measure. Trade agreements included provisions for species experiencing hardship. Military conflicts ended in negotiated settlements more often than decisive victories. Scientists began sharing discoveries openly instead of hoarding them for political advantage. The humans, for their part, seemed barely aware of the change they were causing. They simply continued being themselves. They wept at sad stories and laughed at good news. They formed friendships that crossed every boundary of species and culture. They treated strangers with a warmth that Federation species had traditionally reserved for close kin. It was during this period of gradual transformation that the crisis began. They were an old species, one of the founding members of the Federation. They had once been great explorers, their ships ranging across the galaxy in search of knowledge, but their sun had begun to die. The process was slow by cosmic standards, fast by the standards of civilizations. Within 3 generations, their world would become uninhabitable. 4 billion faced extinction. The Federation Council convened an emergency session to address the crisis. The mathematics were clear. Evacuating 4 billion beings from a dying solar system would require resources beyond any reasonable allocation. The logistics alone would strain Federation infrastructure for decades, and for all their historical significance, controlled no strategic resources. Their territory held nothing that the Federation needed. The Council's recommendation was delivered in the calm, rational tone that had governed galactic affairs for managed decline, humanitarian observation, a gradual reduction of population through voluntary migration, with resources allocated to those who possessed skills valuable to the Federation. The rest would be made comfortable until the end. The human delegation sat in silence as this recommendation was read. Ambassador David, who had replaced Sarah after her death from old age, listened with an expression that other species had learned to recognize as dangerous. It was the look humans got when they were about to do something that all rational analysis. "No," he said when the reading concluded. Just that one word. No explanation, no alternative proposal, just a flat refusal to accept what every calculation indicated was the only practical response. The council chamber erupted in confusion. What did the humans mean, no? The mathematics were clear. The resources did not exist. What alternative could they possibly propose? David stood before the assembly, his voice steady despite the impossibility of what he was about to suggest. "We save them," he said. "All of them, we find a way." The humans did not wait for Federation approval. They went home and told their people what was happening. They described their history, their culture, the 4 billion souls facing annihilation, and then they asked for help. The response overwhelmed even the humans themselves. Millions volunteered. Ordinary people with no training in interstellar logistics offered their time and labor. Wealthy individuals emptied accounts they had spent lifetimes filling. Corporations donated ships that had been built for profit, now repurposed for rescue. Scientists abandoned prestigious research projects to work on evacuation technology. Artists created works designed to inspire others to join the effort. It was chaos by Federation standards. There was no central planning authority, no rational allocation system, no careful calculation of costs and benefits. There was only a species that had decided, collectively and without debate, that they would not stand by while 4 billion people died. The humans called it the Exodus, and it became the largest civilian mobilization in galactic history. They convinced 17 other species to join them, not through political pressure or economic incentives, but simply by asking. Humans showed up at council meetings and diplomatic functions and chance encounters in hallways, and they talked about They shared stories about culture and families and children who would never grow up if nothing was done. They did not argue or persuade or negotiate. They simply made it impossible to look away. The evacuation took 7 years. It should have taken 30. Ships that had never been designed to work together somehow coordinated their efforts. Resources that did not exist were found or created or borrowed, or simply wished into being through sheer human stubbornness. Problems that experts declared unsolvable were solved by people too ignorant to know they were impossible. 4 billion reached safety. Not most of them, not the valuable ones, not a calculated percentage, all of them. The Federation's accountants produced a report on the Exodus. The numbers were staggering. The resources expended could have funded 1,000 lesser projects. The economic disruption would take decades to correct. The precedent set would encourage other species to expect similar treatment in similar circumstances. By every rational measure, the operation had been a catastrophic misallocation of galactic resources. And yet something strange happened to the species that participated. Workers who had volunteered for evacuation duty reported feeling different afterward. Lighter, they said, though they could not explain what they meant. The work had been exhausting, the conditions terrible, the personal cost significant. But they used words like purpose and meaning and connection in ways that had never used before. Silicate engineers who had helped design emergency habitation systems experienced unprecedented creative breakthroughs in the years following the Exodus. They reported that their thinking had changed somehow, that they approached problems with a new kind of awareness. When asked to explain, they struggled to find words. The best they could manage was that they now thought about who their work would help, not just what it would accomplish. A fleet commander named had led the military escort that protected the evacuation convoys. She had been a decorated officer, her career built on strategic excellence and rational decision-making. 3 months after the Exodus concluded, she submitted her resignation. She was going to become a teacher, she said. She wanted to work with children, to help them understand things that she had only recently learned herself. Her resignation letter included a phrase that would later be quoted in academic papers across hundreds of worlds. She had discovered, she wrote, purpose beyond function. The Federation's psychologists had a name for what was spreading. They called it empathic resonance. Their research suggested that humans did not simply feel empathy more strongly than other species. They somehow transmitted that capacity to others. Prolonged exposure to human emotional patterns appeared to awaken dormant capabilities in alien minds. The effect was not immediate or universal. Some individuals seemed resistant, though even they reported subtle changes after extended contact with humans. Others experienced profound transformations, their entire worldview shifting in ways they struggled to describe. But the direction was always the same, toward greater connection, deeper feeling, stronger bonds between beings who had previously seen each other as strangers. The implications terrified many Federation officials. The rationality accords, the foundation of galactic civilization, were built on the assumption that emotion was an obstacle to good governance. Decisions were supposed to be made through careful calculation, not through feeling. If humans were somehow teaching other species to feel more deeply, they were undermining the very principles that had maintained galactic stability for 11,000 years. Some called for restrictions on human contact. Others proposed studying the phenomenon to find ways of blocking it. A few voices, growing louder each year, suggested that perhaps the problem was not with the humans but with the Accords themselves. The debate would continue for decades, but those who had participated in the Exodus already knew how it would end. They had felt something during those 7 impossible years, something that calculation could not capture and logic could not explain. They had experienced what it meant to sacrifice for strangers, to give without expectation, to see themselves as part of something larger than their own individual survival. And once you felt that, you could not unfeel it. The end came not with war or revolution, but with a vote. It happened at the Centennial Review of the Rationality Accords, a ceremony that had been purely ceremonial for 11,000 years. The Accords were the foundation of everything. No one seriously proposed changing them. No one imagined they could be changed. The session opened like every Centennial Review before it. Delegates filled the great chamber, representatives of 847 species arranged in concentric rings around the central speaking platform. The protocol officers read the traditional opening statements. The historians recited the accomplishments of the past century. Everything proceeded according to ancient custom. Then it was time for the review itself. Normally, this consisted of a series of minor adjustments, technical corrections that did not alter the fundamental principles. The real purpose was to reaffirm the Accords, to remind the galaxy of the rational order that made their civilization possible. Ambassador Ara of the Silicate Collective requested the floor. She was very old now, her crystalline form clouded with age, her voice carrying the weight of 2.5 centuries. She had been present at first contact with humanity. She had written the report that struggled to explain what she had witnessed. She had watched the changes spread through the galaxy in the decades since. "I wish to propose an amendment," she said. The chamber fell silent. Amendments were rare. Significant amendments were almost unheard of, and Ara was not known for dramatic gestures. "I propose," she continued, "that we remove the requirement for rational justification from all Federation assistance programs." The silence stretched. Then the questions began, and then the arguments, and then something that the Federation had not seen in thousands of years: genuine debate about the fundamental principles that governed their civilization. Delegate after delegate rose to speak. Many defended the Accords. They pointed to the stability of the past, the conflicts prevented, the resources preserved. Rational governance had made their civilization possible. To abandon it was to risk everything. But others told different stories. A silicate merchant spoke of a debt he had forgiven during the economic crisis of the previous decade. A family had lost everything when their business collapsed. By every rational measure, they could not repay what they owed. The logical choice was to pursue collection through legal means, to recover whatever fraction was possible. Instead, the merchant had simply canceled the debt. "I cannot explain why I did it," he admitted. "The numbers made no sense, but I knew them. I had eaten meals in their home. I had met their children. When I thought of enforcing collection, I felt something I had never felt before. It was like pain, but it was not my pain. It was theirs." An engineer described staying late to help a colleague from another species. The colleague was struggling with a project far outside her expertise. There was no professional benefit to helping, no logical reason to spend hours explaining concepts that should have been basic. But the engineer had seen the fear in her colleague's eyes, the shame of admitting failure. "I remember thinking that I should leave," the engineer said. "I remember thinking that this was not my problem, but then I imagined how I would feel in her position, and I could not walk away." A general spoke last. He had commanded forces in 3 territorial conflicts. He had made decisions that cost lives, always justified by strategic necessity and rational calculation. But recently, he had been given orders that troubled him. A campaign that would achieve its objectives but cause suffering far beyond military necessity. "I refused," he said. "I was prepared to accept the consequences. Court-martial, disgrace, prison. It did not matter. I had seen what those orders would do to people who had done nothing to deserve it. People with families, with hopes, with lives as real as my own. I could not be the instrument of their destruction, not for any strategic gain." The humans, remarkably, said very little. Ambassador David's successor, a woman named Maria Santos, sat quietly through most of the debate. When she finally rose to speak, her words were simple. "We did not come here to change you," she said. "We came here hopping to make friends. We shared what we had because sharing is what we do. We helped when we could because helping is what we do. If that has caused problems, we are sorry, but we cannot be other than what we are." She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives of 847 species. "What you have felt," she continued, "what you are feeling now, this is not something we gave you. It was always inside you. We just reminded you it was there." The debate continued for 3 days. Every argument was heard, every objection considered. The Federation prided itself on thorough deliberation, on careful examination of all perspectives. But something had changed in the way the delegates listened to each other. They were not simply evaluating arguments for logical soundness. They were hearing the experiences behind the arguments, the lives that had shaped them. When the vote finally came, the result shocked everyone who had studied Federation history. 623 species voted to dissolve the Galactic Federation. Not to reform it, not to amend the Accords, to end it entirely and build something new in its place. The proposal was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. It called for a loose confederation bound not by rational optimization, but by mutual commitment to one another's flourishing. It included no requirements for logical justification, no formulas for calculating the proper allocation of resources. It simply stated that the member species would help each other, not because calculation demanded it, but because helping was the right thing to do. The Federation's final session was brief. The protocol officers read the traditional closing statements for the last time. The historians recorded the moment for archives that would soon belong to a different kind of civilization. Ambassador Ara delivered the closing remarks. Her voice was soft, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. "When I first encountered humanity," she said, "I thought they were foolish. They had sent a probe into the void carrying messages of peace and hope and information about themselves. They had broadcast their vulnerability to the cosmos. Our analysts concluded that this was either stupidity or an elaborate trap." She paused, her crystalline form catching the light of 1,000 suns through the chamber's transparent ceiling. "We did not understand," she continued. "We could not understand, not then. The probe was not a weakness. It was an invitation, an offer of connection sent by creatures who believed that even in the vastness of space, even among strangers who had never met, there could be friendship, there could be understanding, there could be love." She looked at the human delegation, at Maria Santos sitting quietly among beings from other worlds. "You taught us something we had forgotten," Ara said. "You reminded us that we are not merely rational actors pursuing optimal outcomes. We are beings capable of caring for each other, of sacrificing for each other, of finding meaning in each other's existence. We are capable of empathy." The chamber was silent, not the silence of deliberation or analysis, but something deeper, a shared recognition of what they had become. "The Federation served us well for 11,000 years, Ara concluded. "But we have it. We have become something more than what logic alone could make us. And for that, we have these strange, wonderful, impossible creatures to thank." The session ended not with the traditional recitation of optimal outcomes. Instead, something happened that the translator system struggled to process. Species that had communicated through formal protocols began expressing emotions they did not know they had. Some laughed, some embraced, some simply sat in wonder at what they were feeling. And some wept. 847 species, together in that chamber, learning what humans had always known, that tears were not a weakness but a gift, a sign that you had allowed yourself to feel deeply enough to be moved by the joys and sorrows of others, a proof that you were not alone in the universe. The humans wept with them, as they always had, as they always would. They had come to the stars carrying nothing but their capacity for connection, their stubborn insistence on caring about strangers, their beautiful, irrational, galaxy-changing empathy. And in the end, that had been enough.